In addition to using money-metric measures of poverty, subjective poverty estimates provide a holistic picture of poverty in a country. The self-perceived wealth question measure recorded the least incidence of poverty of the three indicators, with 26.3% of households who perceived themselves as poor. The income evaluation question measure reported the highest incidence of poverty, with 46.7% of households identifying as living in poverty. And the minimum income question measure yielded the highest subjective poverty rate, with more than half of South African households being classified as poor.
Subjective poverty allows households to define poverty cutoffs in their own terms. The findings of the report show that the profile of a subjectively poor household in South Africa is one typically headed by a black African female who is younger than 35 years of age, residing in a rural area that is located in a rural-based province and who has lower levels of education. The dwelling in which this household lives in usually has between 0 and 1 bedrooms. When taking the happiness status of this household into account, they tend to be less happy than they were 10 years ago.
By far more Black Africans subjectively feel that they're living in poverty compared to very few whites. And that is across the three subjective poverty measures used.
Freya says fewer people are feeling optimistic about their circumstances, which she says policymakers need to look into. Provincially, subjective poverty was most prevalent in Limpopo, followed by Northwest and then KwaZulu-Natal. Nationally, the largest share of poor households living in poverty were headed by those that were single and have never been married or never lived together as husband and wife before.
Women-headed households, and especially households headed by young women, are the most vulnerable, and they feel the most impoverished of all household types in South Africa. And that's clearly an indication of a lack of linked-in as to other forms of support. And that's also really important for people to recognize. We know that the burden of poverty in South Africa falls unfairly on the shoulders of women.
Although this report looks at surveyed data in 2019, it's likely that the perceptions have not changed in 2022.
The income gap for the majority of South Africans is incredibly high, and that's really the poverty which is increasing as unemployment rises. We know in South Africa that while we have grants for children and old age people and people living with disabilities, we have no formal permanent social security income replacement for working age people.
Diabo Sito, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Community healthcare workers in the Eastern Cape have marched on the health department. They will soon be without work when their contracts expire at the end of the month. The group of 600